Hello and welcome to ONCA 101, Directors and Officers' Duties for Ontario Nonprofits. My name is Benjamin Miller. I'm a lawyer who serves nonprofits and charities, and I'm of counsel with B.I.G Charity Law Group. In this video, I'm going to take you through the absolute basics of your duties as directors or members of the board, or officers like president, secretary, or treasurer of nonprofits incorporated in Ontario. Now, I'll say right from the get-go, this is a very complicated topic and we're only scratching the surface. So this is by no means the end, this is just the beginning, giving you the absolute minimum to get you started to think about your duties as directors or officers. Before we get started, I'll just mention that the following presentation is general legal information, not legal advice tailored to your specific situation. If you're facing a situation where there's a question whether somebody's met their duties or not, I suggest you reach out to competent legal advisor. Now, I will share my contact information at the end of this presentation, or you could also go to charitylawgroup.ca. So, just to begin, directors and officers are what's called fiduciaries at law, and fiduciary is just a fancy word meaning somebody who has to put the best interests of somebody else first at law, and it's usually because they have a special position of power or trust. So, for example, parents are fiduciaries. They have to put the interests of their children first. If you're a doctor and somebody's unconscious in front of you, you have fiduciary obligations to them. So directors and officers have fiduciary obligations to the corporation because they're in a position of power and trust over the assets of the corporation. They really control and oversee it. So that the first principle that should really stick with you is that your obligation as a director and officer is to put the interests of the organization first, above your own. Now, the way this is spelled out in Ontario's Not-for-Profit Corporations Act is, firstly, every director and officer has a duty to act honestly, in good faith, with a view to the best interests of the corporation. So I'm going to unpack each of these three ideas. So firstly, you have a duty to act honestly. And this basically means that if it smells funny, if you think there could even be a question of whether there's a problem, you should be open and transparent about it to your board. You should disclose any possibility of a conflict of interest, and just be generally honest and candid and transparent about your dealings with the organization. Secondly, you should be acting in good faith. Basically what this means is that you shouldn't have hidden motives, especially not only acting in your own interest, but maybe the interests of others, anybody other than the organization. And finally, and most interestingly, every decision you make, so when you ask yourself, you're sitting in a board meeting and there's a decision in front of you, how should I decide which is the right path? Ask yourself what's best for the organization as a whole. Some directors or officers think, who do I answer to? I answer to the donors, or I answer to the beneficiaries, or I answer to our members. The answer is, from a legal perspective, that you actually answer to all of them in a way. The corporation is the center of a network of a bunch of different interests, and your goal as a director is to try to balance them. That's difficult in practice, but that's the ideal you're striving for. Next, you have a duty of care, reasonable skill, and diligence. And this basically means that you should care, you should attend meetings, you should be reading in advance, you should be informing yourself about the decision you have to make, and where you don't understand something, you should get advice. That's what diligence and skill means. You're not expected to be an expert. The standard is not one of perfection. The standard is one of being a reasonably prudent person, the way you would deal with your own affairs in your life. So the benefit of this is that if you're an expert, you should know you're not going to be treated especially harshly. But if you're a total beginner, you should also know that you don't get any slack just because you're a beginner. The goal is always the standard of a reasonably prudent person. And finally, you have a duty to comply with the Ontario Not-for-Profit Corporations Act as well as your articles and bylaws. So read these, apply them, and if they don't make sense in your case, it might mean you need to revisit your bylaws or articles. So if you have any questions about what we discussed, feel free to reach out to me at benjamin.miller@charitylawgroup.ca, or just go to charitylawgroup.ca and I'm sure we'd be happy to help you with your issue. Thanks for listening.